So obviously, being a child of the '90s, I was always able to access, you know, a route to gaming. But as I got older and I grew up in an area where esports started to become less of a thing that happened in someone's basement and more of a thing that happened in national stadiums. And I just feel like it's a shame that I'm not from Denmark because I swear Danish people just have all the privileges in the world when it comes to becoming an esports superstar. Or, it's a shame that I didn't grow up in North America because obviously, you know, North Americans have all the access to all the money in the world, you know. Or it's a shame I didn't come from, say, India with the heavy tech industry there, where I could have just walked into a team. But no, I came from the UK. So there was no chance whatsoever. I use that example as a way of showing how when someone brings something up without the context or without giving enough of a background to their assertions, like, being Danish predisposes you to being able to access esports, for example. I use that as an example to show how when we talk about given social issues, particularly, things that will have an effect on someone or someone's friend, like affect all of us, there's often the liability to forget that we're not always talking within, I guess, what would be one's echo chamber. And due to this, the liability to strawman people's arguments or people's assertions goes up a lot higher. Easy, simple one is when people talk about, say, white privilege, for example, and then that becomes strawmanned as by, by a white male normally as, I feel like I'm viewed as a bad person just for being born as a white male. Naturally comes about often because I believe not enough people, especially on the internet, and once again, I wouldn't say I'm anti-Twitter, but I'm believe that Twitter is a place in which liabilities arise a lot quicker because it's short and you don't have much space to like explain yourself and you know divulge information. It's all about snappy shit, right? So places like that where you see one tweet that becomes effectively a dog whistle for those who are clued up. Okay, why is white privilege a problem? Why does it persist in certain arenas? All these little background things. But if they just mention white privilege without actually giving the context, for example, historical context of, institutionalized racism, for example, and how people inherit the privileges they get, or they inherit the lack of privilege, or the deficit, or the oppression, or the effects of oppression, such as, your family has a bit more money because you didn't, have to sit at the back of the bus, meaning you could get to work on time, or you had more access to other jobs. I mean, I'm in China, for example, young black male, things like teaching young kids, a little bit rougher, a little bit more turbulent. But anyway, it's the idea of the context has to be provided at least once in a while to ensure, firstly, that it's not just repeddling information from someone else, as maybe a younger teen might do, without actually truly understanding, before they really start to heavily develop their critical thinking skills and like individuality. But secondly, for those who obviously aren't fully clear, like clued up to the issue, to actually have an avenue in which they can understand, giving a little bit of insight, giving an actual anecdote or an actual situation that happened in real life. Well, with the hope that people actually believe you, which is another issue in itself. People actually being trusted with their anecdotes, and not being seen as, over exaggerations of an event. Oh, like that wasn't really sexual harassment, for example. But yeah, I believe, especially in this day and age, the liabilities for straw men are too high, and the potential for straw men is too high for us to have any true progress when we have discussions about these things, which then slowly lead to things like, you know, democratic votes or things like that. Or, you know, it goes back to the whole, you know, separation of like you versus them versus actually inviting people to look at the problem, especially if the problem has benefited them. So therefore it's harder for them to see the deficits of the issue, be it a certain privilege or be it something as simple as say, oh, you know, driving is easy. Yeah, but you have a car that your parents bought you, or you live in an area where they actually utilize and prioritize road safety and the layout over, say, you know, buildings of luxury houses, for example. Anyway, lots of tangents going on. Simply put, we need, if not we ought to, but we need to make sure we're clear when we state certain things, especially when it's high frequency words like white privilege, like nanny state, for example. That's another one. What do you actually mean by these things? Give an example, you know, simple thing back at school. You give a point, you know, you state something, give evidence and explain and diverge. Obviously, we can't do these things all the time. You know, for example, the effects of white female privilege in the teaching industry in China. Oh, by the way, white female privilege is this and this and this and this. But thing is, those who know, but those who don't know really don't know, and therefore, straw men, they appear everywhere, like one there, one there, one there. And obviously, it's a question of, you know, person on Twitter is writing for their audience, who they assume will know because they know the person, they know the writer. But then, problem with the public domain is that, you know, it's very easy to get to someone who doesn't know you or doesn't know the circles and the meanings and the actual precise exact what you mean when you use these words. You know, and that's where the endless danger comes, because it creates more and more opportunities for someone to like separate themselves from me and you, you know, seeing these people as exaggerators of issues, or, you know, we don't have that problem anymore, for example, is one thing that's peddled more and more as we, you know, we do move towards progress. So naturally you think you don't have that problem anymore because it's not overt anymore, or it's not as frequent as before. Although, you know, a lot of people forget about the historical inheritance, like I mentioned in a previous video, about the socioeconomic conditions that we inherit as individual people, individual families, but also as countries. You know, looking at, say, post-colonial nations, and like, oh, why can't they get a leg up? Well, because of hundreds of years of this. But like, it's fine now. They're independent nations. Why can't they just sort it out in 40 years of existence, right? You know, despite leaving a history of corruption or exploitation. So there's clearly the haves and have-nots. Oh, like, why can't these people in deep poverty just, you know, stop having kids? Why can't they just go to school? You know, because school costs money, and, you know, one accident and that means a hospital fee or school fee, and these things can't be paid. And I don't know many people who would tell their kid to go to school when they're on the point of starving. They'll be like, hey, can you help out the farm? Can you help sell some stuff? For example. But I think on top of everything, the key thing is just being careful and being clear. And that's probably one of the bigger issues we have. We have always access to information, but which of it is, I wouldn't say deliberate lies, but which of it is potential falsehoods that we peddle along, or potential unclarities that lead to falsehoods. So for you, you know, the classic thing about straw men is that you say a certain thing about a privilege, but then it turns into a potential falsehood peddled by those who misunderstood it or didn't really make any effort to understand it as an attack on a certain person. Like, you're attacking me for being white or being male or being, say, female, you know, in the teaching profession, for example, rather than highlighting an issue that benefits you and comes at the deficit of someone else. But yeah, clarity, I guess, is the biggest thing to take away. On top of that, I think there's that whole side of, oh, can you explain yourself? Where obviously one doesn't always want to do that extra labor every single time. And nor should they really have to, especially if you're really at the point of anger, then that means you've misread something. Or they might, you know, it might be that one time where it is really just an attack and someone is actually being quite belligerent. But are these points separated? And is it just a case of that one time where someone was actually truly being belligerent, and you likening this other person who uses the same terminology in a more peaceful way, and liking them as the same, rather than saying, oh, this person uses it that way, but this person actually wants to make an actual effort to address the problem. But I think there's also that slight defensiveness of, like, you know, how can you say I'm privileged when I go through this and that? But then it's the case of, in this particular realm, there's a slight advantage, or might be a great advantage that was inherited that still lingers as a slight advantage. You know, I talk a lot, obviously, once again, positive, negative privileges. You know, things like, oh, my granddad wasn't harassed by the police endlessly, so going to work was easier, going home was easier, applying for certain jobs was a lot easier. That means he was able to set up a bit more comfort, maybe save a bit more money, compared to my friend's granddad, for example. You talk about, well, that'd be a negative privilege. A positive privilege is something as simple as, oh, my parents aren't immigrants, so they're a bit more stable. But in both situations, you have this manifest as, you're more stable than I am, but I'm not going to attack you for it because you didn't personally do anything wrong. But when people feel like they're part of the problem just because they benefited from it, you know, maybe it ever comes out as, you're attacking me, but also maybe there's that indirect sense of guilt, like, oh, maybe I deep down kind of saw this, but I didn't really do enough about it, and I feel bad about it. And maybe I'm angry at myself for not being able to do anything. And sometimes you can't really do anything in your position. You're a 15-year-old kid. You just benefited from your great grandparents who were slave owners or whatever. You know, your dad was a landlord, so you got much richer than your friends. And you can't feel bad unless there's something in which you can do, something simple as standing with your friend in solidarity against, you know, current issues. Like if your friend gets stopped and searched, for example, and how much us individuals can do. You know, so there's lots of things going on. There's the case of clarity about certain issues, but also the case of the individual who benefits and what they can really do about certain privileges or certain issues, and how much they might feel attacked, especially those who are often quite positive people who want to be better people to everyone around them. And naturally they feel bad because it's like they feel like they're getting lumped in as a perpetrator rather than as a benefactor. I think sometimes it's like, if my dad is a crime boss and I benefited from his crime, I get lumped in with him. I'm seen as part of the crime family rather than just the benefactor purely. I think maybe that's where people get defensive, because they tend to lump things quite together. But we'll get to that in a later video about how certain things are lumped together quite a lot. Yeah, just a lot of that clarity, big deal, very, very big deal. But given the time for people to actually understand, rather than just write them off as, don't you dare give me more labor to explain this. Google is free. Google is free, but so is your time to go on Twitter. I believe there should be at least a little inkling of an opportunity for someone to understand from a purely neutral position, especially because when it's certain privileges, you forget, because, you know, that's just normal for you. If a privilege is just normal for you, you forget little things like, oh, for example, me being able to walk home at night safely in basically anywhere in the world, you know. You forget these things because they're normal to you, especially when it's negative privileges, like, you know, not feeling threatened or not being racially profiled, or, you know, not being liable to prejudice of some sort. You forget because that's the norm, and that ought to be the norm for everyone, you know. So then it does come as a bit of a shock. So, you know, people end up shocked, surprised, and get defensive, rather than saying, you know, shocked, but then maybe potential for enlightenment that would come from adding some context. And I think those who are, you know, somewhat woke, you know, some what we call the blinkers, people that have woken up more than once, ought to remember that, especially those who are, you know, were in their position before, where maybe they would have not seen these things a few years back, and not get too frustrated with those people who are liable to produce straw men, like, I'm being attacked for something I was born with, sex, skin color, economic strata, for example. Yeah.